September 1941. Occupied Europe. The morning arrived without birdsong. A thin layer of mist clung to the cobblestones as military trucks rolled through the town square. Their engines growled against the silence. Shopkeepers opened their shutters carefully, avoiding eye contact with the soldiers stationed on every corner. The war had not merely occupied the streets. It had occupied conversations, routines, and even thoughts. People had learned to speak softly. Some had learned not to speak at all. Near the edge of the town stood a modest brick schoolhouse. Its walls were old. Its windows rattled whenever a truck passed by. To the occupying authorities, it was one of the least important buildings in town. Children learned arithmetic there. They practiced handwriting. They memorized geography lessons. Nothing threatening. Nothing dangerous. Nothing worth watching. At least, that was what everyone believed. Inside one of the classrooms, a woman carefully arranged stacks of exercise books on a wooden desk. Her movements were precise, almost ritualistic. She was neither a soldier nor a politician. She carried no weapon. Her uniform consisted of a plain dress dusted with chalk. Every morning, before her students arrived, she performed the same routine. She checked the windows. She straightened the maps. She counted the notebooks. Then she listened. Not for children. For trucks. For boots. For unexpected footsteps in the corridor. Because by 1941, caution had become as necessary as breathing. The occupation had transformed ordinary citizens into reluctant experts in fear. The teacher understood this better than most. Each week brought new restrictions. New arrests. New disappearances. A baker would fail to open his shop one morning. A railway worker would vanish after being questioned. A neighbor would suddenly stop appearing at church. Nobody asked questions anymore. Questions could be dangerous. Answers could be fatal. And yet, beneath the surface of obedience, something else was growing. Resistance. Small at first. Invisible. Scattered. Ordinary men and women refusing to surrender entirely. The problem was not courage. The problem was communication. Resistance groups existed across the region, but connecting them was almost impossible. Roads were monitored. Letters were inspected. Telephones were tapped. Informants seemed to appear everywhere. The occupiers understood a simple truth. An isolated resistance movement could be controlled. A connected one could become dangerous. And so they focused enormous resources on breaking communication networks. They searched bags. Opened envelopes. Stopped travelers. Examined documents. Every message carried risk. Every courier carried fear. Entire operations had collapsed because one note was discovered in the wrong pocket. The resistance needed a solution. But solutions were becoming increasingly rare. The teacher witnessed this reality through fragments. A whispered conversation after church. A nervous glance exchanged in a market. A folded newspaper left deliberately on a bench. Small signs. Tiny cracks in the surface of occupation. Nothing dramatic. Yet impossible to ignore. One afternoon, after classes ended, she watched her students leave the school grounds. Children moved freely through the town. Past checkpoints. Past patrols. Past suspicious eyes. Some walked several miles home. Others traveled to neighboring villages. They carried school bags stuffed with textbooks and homework assignments. Nobody stopped them. Nobody searched them. Nobody considered them a threat. The soldiers barely looked up. After all, they were children. Too young. Too harmless. Too ordinary. And that was precisely the point. History often teaches us that power belongs to those with authority. But sometimes power hides in plain sight. Sometimes the people overlooked by everyone become the people capable of changing everything. The teacher stood by the classroom window and watched her students disappear into the fading afternoon light. A thought entered her mind. It arrived quietly. Without ceremony. Without certainty. Just a possibility. What if the very thing that made children invisible could become useful? What if the occupation's greatest assumption was also its greatest weakness? The idea frightened her immediately. Not because it seemed impossible. Because it seemed possible. There was a difference. Impossible ideas could be dismissed. Possible ideas demanded action. And action carried consequences. She understood those consequences well. If discovered, she would be arrested. Perhaps imprisoned. Perhaps worse. The resistance fighters who received her help would face execution. Even the children could become victims. The risk was enormous. Yet every week brought new evidence that doing nothing carried its own cost. The occupation depended upon silence. Upon isolation. Upon fear. The resistance needed connection. The question was whether connection could be hidden where nobody thought to look. That evening, long after the school had emptied, she remained alone in her classroom. Outside, darkness settled over the town. Inside, a single lamp illuminated rows of exercise books waiting to be graded. She opened one. Then another. Then another. Pages filled with spelling exercises. Arithmetic problems. History notes. Nothing remarkable. Nothing suspicious. But as she turned each page, a possibility began taking shape. Homework traveled farther than most adults. Homework passed through households, villages, and communities. Homework was expected. Homework was ordinary. And ordinary things often survive where extraordinary things fail. The realization settled over her with unsettling clarity. Perhaps messages did not need to look like messages. Perhaps resistance did not need secret ink or elaborate codes. Perhaps the safest hiding place in occupied Europe was a child's school assignment. The lamp flickered. Outside, military vehicles passed through the square. Inside, a schoolteacher stared at a notebook and imagined a different kind of battlefield. One fought not with rifles, but with paper. Not with explosives, but with information. Not by soldiers, but by children who had no idea they were standing at the edge of history. And somewhere beyond the classroom walls, events were already moving toward a test that would determine whether her idea was brilliant or catastrophic. October 1941. The rain arrived before dawn. It drummed softly against rooftops and turned the narrow streets into ribbons of mud. German patrols continued their routines despite the weather. Boots splashed through puddles. Trucks rolled past shuttered storefronts. Orders were barked. Papers were checked. The machinery of occupation never rested. Inside the schoolhouse, however, another system was beginning to emerge. Quietly, patiently, almost invisibly. The teacher knew she could not simply hand messages to children and hope for the best. That would have been reckless. The success of any resistance network depended not only on courage, but on discipline. A careless act could destroy months of work. So she designed something far simpler. And far safer. At first, nothing seemed unusual. Students continued receiving homework assignments exactly as before. Geography lessons. Mathematics exercises. Short essays. Reading comprehension. The pages looked ordinary because they were ordinary. Mostly. A certain arithmetic problem might contain a sequence of numbers that meant little to a child but everything to a resistance contact. A geography assignment might direct attention toward a specific village. A spelling exercise might conceal a name hidden among seemingly random words. No dramatic codes. No spy novels. No invisible ink. Only information hidden beneath the camouflage of routine. The genius of the system lay in its simplicity. Occupying authorities searched for secret messages because they expected secret messages to look secret. They searched beneath floorboards, behind paintings, inside hollow furniture. But they rarely searched the contents of a school bag. And when they did, they saw exactly what they expected to see. Homework. History is filled with inventions born from necessity. Some emerge from laboratories. Others emerge from battlefields. This one emerged from a classroom. The teacher never considered herself a revolutionary. She had spent years helping children learn to read and write. She understood their strengths, their habits, their innocence. That innocence became the network's greatest protection. The children were not resistance operatives. Most had no understanding of what was happening around them. They simply carried books home, completed assignments, returned them the following day. The messages moved through their hands without altering their lives. Yet beyond their understanding, information was beginning to flow. Slowly at first. Then steadily. A farmer received news from a neighboring district. A resistance contact learned of an approaching patrol. A safe meeting location was confirmed. Small pieces of information. Tiny fragments. But wars are often influenced by fragments. A warning delivered at the right moment. A route changed in time. A raid avoided by minutes. Survival frequently depends upon information arriving before danger does. Weeks passed. The network expanded. Not dramatically. Carefully. Every step measured. Every risk evaluated. The teacher maintained her normal routine. She greeted students at the door. Corrected assignments. Explained lessons. Attended community gatherings. To outside observers, nothing had changed. And that was precisely what made the system work. The greatest disguise was normality. But normality came at a cost. Every day demanded performance. Every conversation required caution. Every knock on the door produced a moment of fear. The teacher learned to live with uncertainty. At night she often lay awake listening to distant engines. Wondering, had someone talked? Had someone noticed? Had a message been intercepted? Fear became a constant companion. Not overwhelming. Not paralyzing. Just present. A shadow following every decision. Many stories about resistance focus on dramatic acts of heroism, explosions, ambushes, sabotage, yet most resistance work looked nothing like that. Most of it consisted of ordinary people carrying extraordinary burdens, waiting, watching, remaining calm while danger moved closer. The teacher belonged to that quieter category of hero. No crowds would cheer her actions. No newspapers would celebrate her achievements. Success depended upon remaining unnoticed. Ironically, the better she performed her role, the less likely anyone would ever know. Then came the first warning. It arrived on a gray afternoon in November. A local shopkeeper failed to appear for work. By evening, rumors spread through the town. Arrested. Questioned. Taken away before sunrise. Nobody knew why. Nobody knew where. People lowered their voices even further. Fear tightened its grip. The resistance understood the meaning immediately. The occupiers were becoming more aggressive, more suspicious, more desperate to identify hidden networks. Pressure was increasing. And pressure always created mistakes. The teacher sensed the danger long before she could define it. Something had changed. Patrols lingered longer near public buildings. Questions became more frequent. Unexpected inspections occurred throughout the district. The occupation authorities did not know exactly what they were searching for. But they knew something was happening. That uncertainty made them dangerous. Because uncertainty often leads to overreaction. One morning, while students completed their lessons, a military vehicle stopped outside the school. Conversation died instantly. Pencils stopped moving. The room fell silent. The teacher looked toward the window. 2 officers stepped out. Their uniforms were immaculate. Their expressions unreadable. The children noticed them too. Even the youngest understood enough about war to recognize fear. The officers entered the building. Footsteps echoed through the corridor. Slow, deliberate, getting closer. The teacher kept her face calm. Inside, her heart hammered against her ribs. Several notebooks containing coded assignments sat less than 20 feet away. A simple search could expose everything. Months of careful work. Dozens of contacts. Countless risks. All vulnerable in a single moment. The footsteps stopped outside the classroom door. A hand touched the handle. The room seemed to hold its breath. For one terrible second, the future balanced upon a hinge. And the schoolteacher realized that the system she had built was about to face its first true test. The classroom door opened. Cold air drifted into the room. 2 German officers stepped inside. For a moment, nobody moved. 20 children sat frozen behind wooden desks. Pencils hovered above unfinished assignments. The teacher remained standing beside a blackboard covered in arithmetic equations. The officers surveyed the room carefully. Not hurriedly. Not casually. Methodically. Their eyes moved from desk to desk, notebook to notebook, child to child. The teacher felt her pulse quicken. Months of planning. Months of caution. Months of invisible resistance. Everything now depended on whether ordinary schoolwork appeared exactly as ordinary as it was meant to be. One officer approached the nearest row of desks. He picked up a workbook. Flipped through several pages. Arithmetic. Handwriting. Spelling exercises. Nothing remarkable. He placed it down and selected another. The same result. Then another. And another. The children watched silently. Some stared at their desks. Others watched the officers with wide eyes. Few understood the significance of the moment. The teacher understood it perfectly. A resistance network was being examined page by page. Yet the officers could not see it. Because they were searching for something dramatic. Something obvious. Something that resembled espionage. Instead, they found homework. History has a habit of hiding its most important events inside moments that appear completely ordinary. No gunfire echoed through the school. No heroic speeches were delivered. No desperate escape unfolded. Only paper, pencils, and a dangerous idea disguised as routine. After several minutes, the officers returned the notebooks. One exchanged a few brief words with the school administrator. Then they left. The vehicle outside started its engine. Moments later it disappeared down the road. Only when the sound finally faded did the classroom begin to breathe again. The children returned to their work. The lesson continued. But the teacher understood something important had just happened. The system had survived its first real examination. Not because it was perfect. Because it was invisible. The greatest strength of the network was not secrecy. It was familiarity. People rarely question what they expect to see. That realization would shape everything that followed. Over the months ahead, the resistance network expanded carefully across neighboring communities. Messages traveled between villages hidden among educational materials. Warnings arrived before patrols. Meeting locations changed before raids. Information crossed occupied territory without attracting attention. Not every operation succeeded. Not every warning arrived in time. War never allows perfection. Yet again and again, communication reached people who otherwise would have remained isolated. And isolated resistance movements rarely survive. Connected ones sometimes do. The paradox was extraordinary. Military commanders struggled to move information through heavily monitored channels. Yet schoolchildren carrying notebooks accomplished what trained operatives often could not. Not through strength. Not through authority. But through invisibility. The occupation had created countless rules. Countless checkpoints. Countless systems of control. Yet it had overlooked one simple truth. Children still needed an education. And wherever ordinary life survives, opportunities for resistance survive alongside it. The teacher never sought recognition. She measured success differently. Success meant students returning safely home. Success meant another family avoiding arrest. Success meant another message arriving before it was too late. Most evenings she remained in the classroom long after sunset, correcting assignments, planning lessons, reviewing coded patterns hidden within seemingly harmless exercises. The work was exhausting, the responsibility immense. Yet she continued, because she understood something many people discover during history's darkest moments. Courage is rarely the absence of fear. More often, it is the decision that something else matters more. The occupation would continue for years. The dangers would grow. The network would face challenges far greater than a simple classroom inspection. But the foundation had been established. A school, a teacher, a group of children, and an idea so ordinary that it became almost impossible to detect. When historians study resistance movements, they often focus on famous leaders, military operations, and dramatic acts of sabotage. Those stories deserve remembrance. But they are not the entire story. Behind every visible act of defiance stood countless invisible ones. People whose names rarely appeared in official reports. People who transformed ordinary skills into extraordinary weapons. Teachers, clerks, farmers, railway workers, parents, children. The schoolteacher belonged to that hidden world. A world where victory was measured not in medals but in messages delivered. Not in headlines but in lives quietly saved. And perhaps that is why stories like hers matter. Because they challenge our assumptions about power. They remind us that history is not shaped only by generals and governments. Sometimes it is shaped by individuals who recognize possibilities others overlook. A woman with chalk-covered hands. A classroom full of children. A notebook passed from one village to another. Small actions. Tiny decisions. Almost invisible. Yet together, they formed something stronger than fear. Years later, many of the details would fade. Documents would disappear. Memories would grow uncertain. The war itself would become history. But somewhere in forgotten archives and fading recollections remains the outline of a remarkable truth. That in an age of occupation and silence, a schoolteacher looked at a child's homework and saw not merely lessons, but freedom's first draft. And sometimes the future changes not because someone shouts loudly enough to be heard, but because someone whispers carefully enough to go unnoticed.
Your support gives us strength to create more stories. Please like and subscribe.